Fourth time I'm taking this car apart to replace something that went bad, that was ruined by neglect or abuse.
Welcome to Dirt, Sweat, and Gears and the desert of deserted motor vehicles. You've heard of the DMV? Well, get ready for the double DMV. I'm not even sure what that means. We are back here with my Project Prelude. Since we last checked in with this car, I've gotten it running and driving and smogged and legally on the road. And since then, I have been taking it around town, trying to shake it down to discover any other mechanical issues that may come up. See, I want to sell this car, and I don't want to just pass off the problems to a new owner. I really want to fix this thing and turn it into a car that I could actually be really proud of. And so in order to do that, I need to fix everything that I can along the way. And so while I was shaking it down, there were two new issues that came up, in addition to the air conditioning, which we already knew about. One of those issues is the windshield wipers. For some reason, I turn the switch and nothing happens. We definitely have to look into that because this car needs to be safe to drive, and if you're driving in the rain and the windshield wipers won't turn on, it's not safe to drive. Another issue came up while I was shifting gears. So it started to present itself as a little bit of issues going into first. I would get, I don't know, occasionally it would grind going into gear. And I thought, well, maybe I just suck at shifting gears. I don't know. But then I went down to go get a sandwich and I couldn't get this thing into reverse. Luckily, I was on a hill and I was able to just roll back, but that's a real problem and we absolutely need to fix that. So let me pick up the camera and I'll show you what I think happened to these shifter cables to prevent this car from getting into gear properly. And so I got this thing manually put into reverse. I had my wife come out and try to put it in reverse while I manipulated the shift cables directly. And I'm going to show you exactly what I did. But before I jump into that, this car is currently in reverse. So let's make use of that and get this car over there in front of my other Prelude. So we got the car backed up, and wow, this car sure does make my car look really nice. But anyway, we got this car backed up, and now I can show you what exactly is happening with the shifter. So let's just get in the car for a second. So you see how it's currently in reverse? Well, that's because I had my wife put in the clutch and hold it in reverse while I went under the hood and pushed on the shifter cables to get it properly in reverse. Now, what happens is when, we're in first, second, third driving around, it's more or less okay, except it does feel a little bit weird when you're going into first. But in reverse, this is what happens. You think you're going in, but you're not actually going in all the way. And I'm actually going to unplug the microphone for a second, and you can actually hear a pretty horrible noise inside the shifter assembly. So you heard that crunching, rubbing sound as I was moving it back and forth, trying to get it in reverse. That is actually the shift cable itself. The shift cable, I believe, has frayed, and it's frayed from being stretched. Now, why do I think the shifter cable might have stretched? Let's go back in time a little bit to when I first got this car. If you'll remember, when I first got this car, there was a problem with the clutch. It turned out the clutch disc had completely fallen apart. And as a result, we couldn't get this thing into any gear. The clutch was absolutely worthless. So you would put it in gear and it would just be stuck in that gear no matter what you did. That is scary. And so in order to get it to change gears, I had to force it from one gear to the next. And I think that is what caused this problem. It wasn't me from doing it that one time. It was the cumulative effect of having a broken clutch over time and having the shift cables being stretched and forced over and over and over again because the clutch disc had fallen apart. And so because the shifter cables are stretched, I was unable to safely drive this car anywhere. I went and parked it up in the wasteland and it's just left it there for the past few weeks while I tried to secure a new set of shift cables. So the new cables have arrived. Thank you so much to Garrett for sending me these. Now at first glance, this actually looks pretty straightforward. You got the bracket that holds the cables in the engine compartment. You've got the cables themselves, and then you've got the connection to the shifter, and then you got this thing in the firewall. this looks pretty straightforward. However, that goes underneath all of that shit somewhere. This is... So the first step is to take out the intake box for the 15,000th time, and then we kind of dig in from there.
hold me down all the time. With tied up hands and broken bones, you give me pain all the time. With empty heart and drain of veins, you give me life.
Okay, so after you finish taking apart half your fucking engine compartment, you can get down to the bracket that holds on the shifter cables. Except the bracket actually wraps around the water pipe. So you can't actually take this bracket off unless you undo the water pipe. I mean, if you can, you're a better mechanic than me, but this is what it's shaped like. So pulling this thing up is not going to happen. So I have elected to take off these little bracket clip things from the shifter cables. You see them down here by my channel locks. That was, I mean, it was terrible at first, but you have to kind of get the angle on it. The top one was quite easy. You just get a screwdriver in here. The bottom one, you had to kind of really look for the right angle and then stick a thin screwdriver in through first to get it kind of slid out, and then a thicker screwdriver pop it out the rest of the way. Now that I have that side disconnected, we need to disconnect the point where it mounts to the firewall. And I had no idea where that was. So I jacked the car up, I slid under it, and let me show you. So we're down here underneath the car, and we've got the exhaust downpipe here, we got the sway bar here, and then we've got the shifter cables right here. This is actually really easy to get to at this location. You just have to undo that bolt and that bolt, and you should be ready to go inside the car and disconnect it the rest of the way. This is going to be terrible. There is no way around it. This is going to be awful. So off camera, I was able to get the cables out. All of the work happened underneath the car, so I wouldn't have been able to record it for you anyway. But while we're putting the new cable in, I'll go ahead and show you where you need to stick your hands. Because it would be a lot easier if you had someone up here pulling on things, you know, where you need them to pull on things, but it is doable by yourself. You'll also notice that I was able to pull off that bracket. It wasn't as bad as I thought it was. It just required a little bit of a softer touch, I guess. Let's take a quick look at the cables we pulled out of the car and see if I can find a better spot of light here. And you can see right here is where they got damaged. So this had ripped totally out, and this is where its binding is right along this kink here. I am not convinced that this is irreparable, but since we have another pair of cables, we're going to just set this aside. So in order to get to the cables, I wanted to get as much as I could out of the way. I removed the EGR pipe. I also unbolted a bunch of little brackets that I'm totally going to forget where they go because this car is just full of random ass brackets. Yeah, so you can see it goes underneath the EGR pipe, and then it makes a right turn and then goes into the firewall. let's go into the car and I'll show you where you need to stick your hands. So you're going to go back and forth between sticking one hand up between the oil filter and the rear motor mount, and also your right arm is going to go in here in this area to guide the outer part of the cable around. So you got to push it in from here, and then you got to also maneuver it in from the other side. It's a little bit hard to explain, but once you stick your hands up in there and just commit to hugging the car for about 45 minutes, I think you're going to be okay. You see one of the cable ends down there. I was able to get in there with my bent needle nose and pull it up a little bit, and then I also used this pick and I just pulled it up. What I'm hoping the trick was to get over that little lip of metal that is blocking it. It's really hard to see anything on camera because it's just so goddamn Honda in there. I was able to get to the other side to the same lip, so hopefully I can get in there with my bent needle nose or something and pull it up over that ridge. I don't know if I should even bother recording because everything is going to be in the way, but we're going to give this a try. If I get pissed off, I'm going to let the camera roll in, because then you get to hear me yell and scream at the car. What's that noise? Okay, see if I can get the pick in that little eye. Yes! Oh, that's what I needed. Okay, so now I could just kind of pull them both through. I was able to wiggle the shift cables up a little bit. Most of the work is going to be done inside the car. However, once you get to a certain point, you do have to feed more of the line into the firewall. So you're going to be going back and forth a little bit. But you see here, that little knob of the cable, I had to get it over that ridge, just like we did with the ends of the cable. So I have to do that to the cable on the left. I've already done that to the cable on the right. I am making really good progress. But as you can see, the camera is very much in the way. I got this thing lined up. One of my biggest fears was that the cables would be upside down, like reversed. But if you're paying attention to where the rings need to go at either end of the cables, it doesn't really matter what happens in here. It was surprisingly easy to roll it into place where it needed to be, because when I put the cables in initially, they were in fact the other way around. So once I rolled it over, this plate lines up to the holes, and I just have to put the bolts in, and I am good to go. And once I have both sides lined up, I'm going to reconnect the ends to the transmission, give it a quick test before we go putting everything together, because this was, I'm not going to say it was nothing. It wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, but it was definitely an effort. So I want to make sure that the shift cables feel good before I go buttoning all of this other crap up. Real quick, let's check in underneath the car. This is really difficult. This one wasn't so bad, but this little clamp kind of got in my way just a little bit. I used one of these because for one, it had that little angle, so I could swap it around to the angle that I needed, and I could also change direction with this little switch. That was important because if I brought it out too far, I could run the risk of getting stuck, and being able to flip the switch, I was able to unstick myself real easily. On the top bolt here, I had the wrench up like this, and really what I needed, the trick, was to get leverage on the bolt, because just sitting the wrench on there wasn't going to guide it into the hole. So I just got something else, anything else. And so I had my bent needle nose laying around, so I grabbed it in there and it pushed it up against the bolt while I ran it in with the wrench, and it worked. It went in, and I am finally done with that nightmare. And I can move on to the rest of the car, which totally isn't a nightmare. No, not at all. So this is probably something I should have paid attention to when I was first installing it. But the main difference between the two cables is actually pretty easy to figure out. When you have the cables installed, you got it bolted up to the firewall, and then you've got to hook it up to the transmission. That way, you'll know exactly which cable's which. How? Well, that's because the one on the right goes back the farthest. And the one on the left cannot go back this far because it's just not designed to. So that makes it really easy to figure out which one of these cables goes where. So now that we have it mostly in, I'm not going to commit to hammering these down until I test it. So they're just kind of in there, but I can pop them out if I really need to. Let's put the clutch in and start feeling this out. We're in reverse because I had manually put the transmission in reverse from underneath the hood. I knew where that position was, so it was really easy to figure out. So let's try this out. I got the clutch in, and I'm going to start rowing gears. So we're here, and then we're going to go into neutral. First, second. Oh, dude. This feels great. This feels the way it's supposed to. A lot more like my Prelude, where you have that little bit of a notchy feel, but still really smooth engagement. This car is going to drive really nice. So let's get this thing back together, yeah?
You get the cold blood color line. You get the spiral in your mind. You feel the symptoms come again. You think it's over in your head. You should be, you love me. You're satisfied until you get me on the run. You should be, you love me. Is that right? Now you have me for your fun.
So we're ready to move the car with the new shifter cables. I got to pull out of the garage, close the door, and I'll catch up with you in just a second. All right, let's go. First thing I noticed is that things are pretty dirty. Windows and the mirrors. It's just from sitting outside for a few weeks while I was waiting on this part. And the fast idle is a little high. I think I want to turn the screw in just a little bit. I'm going to have to readjust the timing anyway since I pulled the distributor off. So that's probably just a little fine tuning that I still need to do. It really does feel like a low mileage car now. Just in the way that it shifts, the way that it handles, the way that it steers, the way that the car is poised. As I take it through turns, it's a great car. This is mechanically sound for the time being until something else breaks.
This is what we call foreshadowing. It's what happens every time I dare to call a car reliable or done. I'm not sure why I keep doing that.
The idea here is that since I have made this car mechanically sound, you can drive this around as long as you want, just like this, but taking it to the next level is really going to be up to you. And it really should be left up to somebody who is going to own the car long term. Paint is a prime example of this, because if I paint this car, I'm painting it with the intention of selling it. I am not going to spend nearly as much money as I would if I were keeping this car long term. And that's going to drive up the cost to the buyer that is not necessarily going to be happy with the paint job. And you know, they may buy it at a higher price and then paint it again anyway. So it's really something that if I can, I want to leave up to the buyer. And there's other little things on the interior that are going to be up to the buyer for sure, just because a lot of these things that need to be addressed, like, you know, a little crack here, a missing clip there, those are things that very rarely come up in really good condition. And when they do come up, it's very expensive. So it's not that I'm not willing to spend the money on getting a good quality part, it's that I'm not willing to spend the time waiting around looking for parts that are in perfect condition for several years. I need to get rid of this car. I need to move on with my life. We got a lot of projects. I don't know if you noticed in my yard. Well, that is all that I've got for you guys. This ended up being not quite as bad as I was prepared for it to be. It was not a walk in the park, but I was expecting it to be much worse because that's typically what Preludes are. And so with a Prelude, if you expect it to be an absolute nightmare, at the very least, it's going to meet your expectations. So that's it. If you like what you see, like, share, subscribe. Wait just a minute here. It's not time for the outro just yet. As I was shaking down this car, I noticed a few other issues that I need to resolve. The first being an exhaust leak. It's happening around the catalytic converter. I tried to just tighten the bolts and it didn't really work. So I'm gonna have to take these bolts out and drop the catalytic converter and check the O-rings on the exhaust system. The issue that I discovered was that as the car was warming up, the temp gauge in the dash was not rising up to temperature. That's not to say that the car was not warming up. It was most definitely warming up because it was 90 degrees. So it was definitely at least at operating temperature, but the temp gauge didn't say so. So if the temp gauge is not reliable, then we can't trust that the engine is at temperature. So we got to get this into the garage and we have to check our temp gauge sensor. There are 4 temperature related switches on this car. One is the temp gauge that goes into the dash, another is for the ECU, another is for the fan, and another is another fan. So there's 2 fan switches. They work for different reasons. One is in the radiator. There are 2 in the thermostat housing, and then there is the gauge, which is also in the thermostat housing. I've already checked and cleaned the one that's in the radiator, and the car actually does behave correctly. It's just like I said, the gauge. So we're going to take out the 3 temperature sensors that are in the thermostat housing, and hopefully all we have to do is clean off the block sealer that's caked on them. So as I'm pulling this thing apart, the first thing I notice is that the connector to the sensor that informs the dash gauge is not really secure, so it doesn't take much effort for this thing to just pop right off. What I think I want to do here is just cut away at this plastic a little bit and then give this a little bit of squeeze with a channel lock or something that is rounded on the inside so that I can kind of tighten it together. That alone may fix it, but just to be sure, I still want to pull this thing off. Come on out with you. Whoa! Gave a little bit of squirt. This isn't bad. To be honest, I think it's just the connector because this wasn't caked on with anything. I think this is functioning just perfectly the way it's supposed to. So let's go ahead and put it back in. This temp gauge sensor was a 12 millimeter deep socket. That was really easy. These are 22 millimeter, and since I don't have a 22 deep socket, this might be a little bit of a challenge, but I think I've done this before, so you just have to not break the high pressure power steering line like I almost just did. I don't think I hit it that hard though. Okay, this one also looks good. There's, I mean, I'm still gonna clean it up with the carb cleaner. So I have to get new O-rings. Yeah, these are definitely deformed. They're not gonna go back in. But that's okay, part of the job. Yeah, same story. Nothing to write home about, but it looks like I am going to have to get some O-rings and I'll put some new RTV on it, on the threads. But I'm going to stick this back in so I don't lose a bunch of coolant. I pulled the catalytic converter off, and first things first, let's take a look at these bolts. So these are the bolts I was using, and yeah, the threads are pretty stressed and they're a little too long. And I've got like castle nuts from, you know, tie rod ends or ball joints holding them together on the other side. So we are going to replace these with grade 8, and we're going to get grade 8 with grade 8 nuts and some washers to go with it. Then I think that will at least secure it nicely. Now let's take a look at the catalytic converter because it's very telling of our situation here. We've got the rear mating surface, which was the side that was leaking, and you can see it is really kind of covered in carbon here. So here's the tricky thing with catalytic converters. This was basically made to fit multiple cars. That's why it rolls around like that. and it wasn't really a problem on my car. At least it wasn't noticeable, but it's definitely a problem on this car. Well, it certainly looks better. They're all 9/16, which I know that's an SAE size, but the hardware store didn't have grade 8 and metric. So, you know, we're stuck with that unit for now. I used grade 8 because with exhaust components, corrosion is a real problem, and getting bolts seized, and just grade 8 is just so much better for exhaust because it handles the heat cycles much, much better than steel or zinc. And here we're ready to reseal the temperature sensors. I got this universal O-ring kit. I hope it'll do the job. It should. And just to be a little extra cautious, we're going to put just a little bit of RTV on the threads because I think it had RTV before. So it's all back together. One of the things you got to be really careful with these cars is where you put your wrenches, because if you just look at this plastic a little too hard, it'll break. And that actually did happen to this sensor right here. I was tightening this one, and I just grazed it with the wrench, and it broke a little piece off of the plastic here. But I think I got lucky because, well, it does come on and off if you pull on it really hard. For the most part, it is secure. You know what? I am going to replace this sensor, but I'm going to do that later. Right now, I want to test that the exhaust leak is at least acceptable and that, more importantly, our gauge works. So let's just give this coolant a quick bleed. We'll get this car out on the road and we'll see what happens. Okay, the coolant is bled. I've backed out of the garage so that I can close the garage door. Let's go for a drive. Put the windows down. They work nice and quick. You still do hear that exhaust leak. The needle is working. I'll show you in a minute once I get up to full temperature, but the needle does move. The car is almost up to temperature. Well, after going down the hill and back up the hill and doing several hard pulls coming up the hill, the temp gauge is behaving much, much better. It still, to me, looks a tad on the low side. Let's get the laser thermometer on it real quick just to see if it just looks low or if it's actually more accurate than I think. The really good news is that as I was opening the garage door, I did hear the fan kick on. So the car is behaving as intended. So that's really, really good. This is at 190, 198. So the fan should kick on any minute now. It's at 180. You see it kind of going up and down there. The fan will kick on and off as the car warms up and cools down. I believe this is a 195 degree thermostat. So this is behaving the way it's supposed to. There it is. There it is. Primary fan, that one spinning. Very, very cool. So we know it's at least behaving correctly. We know the needle isn't kind of bouncing up and down. So whatever the needle says right now is normal temperature. So that's really good. At least I fixed one of the two problems. Even if this exhaust leak still is a problem, I'm going to take another stab at it. Just maybe I can put another gasket on it. Maybe there's a different material I can use. Maybe it just needs to be tightened. I'm going to give that one more try before, I don't know, maybe I'll give up. So now, what's left here? We've got, of course, the exhaust leak. We've got this belt, makes a lot of noise, and the connector to the power window needs to be tightened up a little bit. It works, but sometimes it doesn't. And if it doesn't, you just open and close the door again, and it'll work again. So that connection is just a little bit loose and needs to be tightened up. And of course, there's the big issue, the air conditioning, and that's going to be a different video. We want to solve these problems in this video because they're all kind of short, little, easy wins, but the air conditioning is going to be a thing. So I've already replaced that temperature sensor. I saw the old one over there. That's the new one installed in the car. As for the exhaust, I'm going to go to a muffler shop and he is going to adjust this flange. I think it was designed for a different exhaust setup because I didn't have a problem with my car, but my car has a 2.5-inch catback. I think that little lip that we saw was actually slipping into the exhaust system on my car, but on this car, since the mating surface is completely flat, it needs to be cut off and re-welded. So we're back from the muffler shop and let's hear this exhaust. So in order to fix this, not only did we have to cut off the flange and re-weld it on the catalytic converter, but we also cut out the mid-pipe, the exhaust resonator. It really didn't make a difference in the way the car sounds, except for the fact that we no longer have a massive, horrible exhaust leak. So from here, it's going to be up to the buyer to work on the exhaust. So the muffler does kind of look a little bit lousy, but at the same time, you may want to put a cap back on it. You may want to restore it. Either way, that's going to be a lot of money going in one direction or the other. That is not really a good idea for me to make that choice. I was diagnosing the seatbelt retractor, and I initially thought it was just a case of gears needed to be lubricated because it's making a noise like that. But upon closer inspection, I came down here and I noticed this little guy dangling here. So we're just going to put this back up here. Eventually, if I can do it with one hand. There. And now it moves nice and smooth. It doesn't make a bunch of noise. It still flops, but that's actually a common problem with these door retractors. Honda had issued a recall and was doing warranty repair on this. However, the supply is pretty much dried out. You can try to go to a Honda dealership and say, I'm here for my warranty seatbelt, and after they get done laughing at you, they're going to tell you that there's no more seatbelt retractors that exist in the entire world. So your only shot is to either figure out how to rebuild that or just live with it. So the issue with the window is in here. So we've got this plug that likes to wiggle around a little bit, and so first thing we need to do is plug in the window switch, and we'll be able to properly diagnose this. We got the cars on, the switch is plugged in, and we see the window goes up and down, but when we push in, okay, it goes up and down. We pull on it, it doesn't, it hesitates. So what I think I'm going to do is pop off these clips so that I can get the switch plug out and then wrap it up with tape while I'm holding it together. I think that's going to do the trick. Well, I didn't have any black tape, so we wrapped it with white tape. And this is really all it needs. I think it's going to be just fine now. Let's turn the car on, hit the switch. Both sides work. We are good to go. Let's get this door panel back on. So we've done a whole lot of things just in the past couple of days on this car. We fixed an exhaust leak. We have fixed the problem with the temperature gauge, and we fixed the problems that we caused along the way, which is the broken temp sensor. And I've also fixed the broken seat belt. Also fixed the window that doesn't like to cooperate sometimes. So the last thing we need to do now is to go out for a drive, especially now that this thing sounds so much better. Let's go on our test drive. First thing to do is notice the loud noise the seat belt is not making. Oh, that is nice. And the horrible noises that the car is not making. Oh, that is good. It sounds the way it should. And so let's just sit here for a second between the houses. And we're not getting any weird resonance out of the exhaust. So that means the exhaust sounds are where they should be, at the back of the car. And the car is driving just absolutely perfect. And as the car warms up, we have the idle going down to where it's supposed to and is running nice and smooth. The clutch engagement is amazing on this car. It's a little closer to the floor, but I'm really finding that I like it that way. You can adjust it to engage the friction zone a little bit farther up, but you probably don't want to go farther down than it is right now. But like I said, this feels really, really good. Like, I get in my car and I push the clutch in and I go, wow, it's like way out by comparison. So it's just so good. This car is so good. So since I am actively talking to a potential buyer right now, I want to address some of the questions that he brought up on text message, because hopefully he watches these videos as well. Some of the questions were, you know, how does it ride? How does it drive? You know, regarding handling dynamics. And, you know, I gotta say, this car, it runs like it's supposed to. Okay, it has a stock suspension on it with new shocks, and the springs only have 127,000 miles on them. So it has new shocks, new steering rack, new ball joints up front. This car handles like it's supposed to from the factory. In my opinion, it's a little floaty on the freeway. And that's just the way they were designed. They weren't designed to go 85, 90 miles an hour. The speeds modern cars are going these days. And my opinion, that it doesn't handle as well as it should, or as well as it could, is why I've modified my car the way I have. So, you know, obviously you don't modify a car to make it worse than it, well, some people do. Typically when you modify cars, your intent is to make the car better. And that's what I felt I've done with the suspension on my modified Honda Prelude. The same with the exhaust. I have an LSD Motorsports exhaust, 2¼ inch mandrel bent with, you know, a really big resonator and a really nice muffler on it. It's louder than stock, but I think it sounds really good. Now, that's an expensive exhaust system, and it's actually really hard to find these days, because I think he only made like 50 cents. And he gave me the prototype because he built it on my car. But I digress. The things that I've done to my car, I did because I felt like it was making the car better. My intent with this car was to not make the perfect Honda Prelude. It was to provide a mechanically sound platform for someone to take this car where they want to take it. So if they want to continue with a factory original restoration, this is a great start to that, because it's already a low mileage car and there's a lot of good about it, and it's mechanically sound. It is mechanically sorted. And if you want to modify it, if you want to turn it into a track demon, you know, if you want to H swap it, go ahead. But it's not my decision to make, because I don't intend to have this car forever. So we're gonna end this video right here. If you like what you see, like, share, subscribe, and comment. And if you don't like what you see, leave a comment anyway, because I want to hear from you. And as I end this video, I'm going to leave you with one last pull of this car so you can hear just how good it sounds. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next video.